Welcome back to Real Takes, where we are all movie love all the time. I'm Ann Stott, and tonight we are shining all the movie love on Judas and the Black Messiah, directed by Shaka King, whose birthday is this week. So happy birthday, Piscean director Shaka King. Judas and the Black Messiah came out in 2021, and it stars Daniel Kaluuya, Lakeith Stanfield, Jesse Plemons, and Dominque Fishback. It's the story of the FBI's persecution of and ultimate murder of Fred Hampton, who was the chairman of the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party in 1968. But we enter that story through the experience of William O'Neill, who was an FBI paid informant who infiltrated the Black Panthers, got close to Fred Hampton, and ultimately supplied the FBI with information that helped them murder him. And, you know, we come into the story through his experience and, you know, what that experience did to him personally. Now, I like to shine a light on what I believe are underseen films, and this film was widely well reviewed, was on a lot of critics' best of the year lists. It was nominated for several Academy Awards. It was the first film with an all-Black production team to get nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars, and it won 2 Oscars, Best Song, and Daniel Kaluuya won Best Supporting Actor for playing Fred Hampton. So is this movie really underseen? I would still say yes, because it came out during the pandemic, and, you know, it was such a strange time, and a lot of films didn't get seen the way they should. And also, I didn't see it on a big screen, and this film is beautifully shot, and I would still love, love, love to see this movie on a big screen. So I want to give it as much love and energy as I can give it, so that hopefully someone, please, somewhere, sometime, play it on a big screen. Thank you. So I in my life have been at different times kind of obsessed with the various political cultural movements of the late 60s and early 70s, the Black Power movements, the counterculture hippie movement, the women's movement, the anti-war movement, all of them. And in fact, there was a time where I literally have to edit myself here. I went on a whole digression about reincarnation, which proves my point about me being obsessed with hippie culture, right? I mean, really a tangent that does not serve our conversation about Judas and the Black Messiah. Suffice to say, I've watched a fair number of documentaries about the late 60s and early 70s and all the various movements that were happening in that time. And as you guys know, I'm a huge fan of cinema from that time, the gritty American drama. So that leads us into the next actually relevant point. And I think it's very, very hard now to make a film about then that feels the way the raw footage from then feels. And it was just such a heightened time in the United States history, and in fact, in global history. I mean, there were movements happening all over the world, freedom movements happening all over the world at that time. There was such a sense of purpose. There was such a particular engagement with self and culture, power structures at large, and it's very hard to kind of bring that feeling from today, because the other thing there was there was just a lot less cynicism than there is now. And it doesn't mean there wasn't despair and a lot of heartache and rage and confusion, but we live in such a media saturated world now, and we're so used to kind of being in a reflection of a reflection of a reflection of ourselves, and corporate and media culture have co-opted so much of what that time was about that it's very hard to strip that all away and just really, as who we are now, represent what that was then. And I feel like this movie really did it in a way that I haven't experienced from a lot of films made now about the late 60s and early 70s. And I think they succeeded for a lot of reasons on a lot of levels. I think it's a really strong script that kind of leaves us with a lot instead of trying to kind of force feed us something. But I think, first of all, it's very grounding to have the movie be fundamentally a character study between these two people. So there's a movement happening, and obviously that's the world we're set in, and it's vital, and it's handled really well on every level, but we're really watching this kind of chess game go on between this informant, William O'Neill, played by Lakeith Stanfield, Fred Hampton, played by Daniel Kaluuya, his partner, Dominque Fishback, the FBI contact, Jesse Plemons, and a few other characters. Shaka King, the director, has said that this movie is basically like Martin Scorsese's Departed, which is if you haven't seen it, it was set in Boston. It's a movie about an informant within the Boston mob, but it's set within COINTELPRO, which was the counterintelligence program of the FBI, which was the program where they stalked, harassed, and persecuted all the freedom movements happening in the United States in the 60s and 70s. So we have that feeling, and we're really following the lived experience of these two people who on the surface seem different, but both Lakeith Stanfield and Shaka King have talked about how, in a way, they're similar. Shaka King has talked about the fact that Fred Hampton and William O'Neill both wanted freedom and power. They just had very different ideas of what freedom and power was. So Fred Hampton believed that freedom and power came through deconstructing the power structures that are preventing all people from having freedom and power. And William O'Neill wanted freedom and power in a more sort of traditional American sense through money and personal autonomy. But I think it shows, how committed they were to both characters' humanity, that they could kind of see these parallels. And it helps that you have two of the most dynamic actors working today playing these characters. And they just both went really deep and, again, kind of stripped away to something very raw and alive in their portrayals of these characters. And Daniel Kaluuya has talked about, when he got the part, obviously, he did a lot of emotional work and historical work and cultural work, but he also had to do a lot of voice work. Daniel Kaluuya is British, and not only was Fred Hampton American, but he had a very particular cadence and was an incredibly charismatic orator. So he knew that this cadence and this ability to speak to groups was going to be a huge part of the work. And also, when you make film, you often have to do scenes multiple times. And so he knew he would be doing these speeches over and over again where you'd have to keep his energy up, but also keep his vocal energy up. And he's talked about, he started working with an opera coach and a voice coach so that he could, give these impassioned speeches over and over and over again and never lose, his vocal power. They also, everyone in the production spent a lot of time with Fred Hampton's son, and also Deborah Johnson, Fred Hampton's partner. So they had a lot of access to, firsthand information about Fred Hampton and his experience. And Deborah Johnson was a member of the Black Panther Party until the Chicago chapter closed, I think, in 1978. So, she had the political information as well as the sort of personal relational information. And Lakeith Stanfield has talked about having a lot of ambivalence about taking this role. Like, did he want to play the Judas? Did he, he has so much respect for and love for the people who were, in these freedom struggles. Then to be the one playing the betrayer, the informant, was hard for him. But he, ultimately became really committed to William O'Neill's humanity and kind of the internal crisis that he found himself in, ultimately, taking on this role and getting close to Fred Hampton, and in some ways loving him and admiring him, and then also, working to undermine him at the same time. So these actors just brought so much authenticity and commitment to these roles, and I always love watching them. Daniel Kaluuya, of course, became a huge star when he was in Get Out a few years before this, Jordan Peele's movie, and in fact Lakeith Stanfield was also in Get Out. They had a couple of scenes together. Lakeith Stanfield's role was smaller, but he just always reaches off the screen and grabs me everything he does. And he starred in Sorry to Bother You, which is Boots Riley's film set in San Francisco, which is probably unlike any movie you've ever seen before. So highly recommend that one, and I may be talking about it in a couple weeks. But they just both brought so much to this movie that helps ground it in its time and place and these people's emotional reality. But I also want to talk about the entire production design, because a big reason I have a hard time watching movies made now about the late 60s and early 70s is that often now movies are shot on video and they're very crisp and clean looking. And again, our world is so made up and we're all picture perfect, and actors are photoshopped, and someone's there to make sure the hair's in place at every second, and it's the antithesis of what that time was about. That time was about questioning how we present ourselves, questioning the power structures that want to make everything look good all the time, right? And so often that aesthetic from now of video crisp perfection is superimposed on that time of the late 60s and early 70s. And I have to tell you, it grates my soul. And so it was such a relief. It was like a warm bath when this movie started, and the production design felt to me so true to the documentaries I've seen from that era, the films I love from that era. So even though this is supposed to be set in Chicago, they shot it in Cleveland. Interesting side note, Todd Haynes's Carol, which we talked about in December, which is supposed to be 1950s New York, was shot in Cincinnati. So there's something going on in Ohio where these cities have not rebuilt certain areas that are standing in for period other American cities. I don't know what's going on there, but interesting. And apparently when Shaka King and the cinematographer Sean Bobbitt started working together, Shaka King brought him 300 pictures that were taken between 1968 and 1973. And those pictures became their kind of Bible of what the film was going to look like. The colors, the textures, the feeling, the deep blacks, one of them has said the way primary colors sort of pop out at certain times. And they shot on video because they didn't have the money to shoot on film. It's so expensive to make a period piece, and then to make a period piece on film is even more expensive. You get to do that when you're Steven Spielberg remaking West Side Story, but you don't always get to do that. So they shot on video, but they did two things. They used a large format camera. I don't even know exactly what that means, but that's what they did. And it meant that they didn't have to use a lot of extra lighting, that the camera was capturing enough information at low light that they could keep the lighting really natural, which helps create a kind of realism and naturalism in the film, but also mimics, what was about to happen. I mean, this film's set in 1968, but is about to happen in cinema. I mean, In the Heat of the Night, which we just talked about, came out in 67, and Haskell Wexler tried to use very low lighting, realistic lighting in that film. But we were about to go into a phase of like real like gritty realism that extended to lighting. Gordon Willis, who was the cinematographer on Clute, which we talked about very early on in Real Takes history, used blacks and low lighting as well to create drama. And I feel like because they used this this large format camera, they could do that here. And it feels to me, again, very authentic to other work that I've seen from that time. And then the other thing they did was that they shot in with wide lenses. And they did that for a number of reasons. Sean Bobbitt apparently likes to shoot with wide lenses. But one of the things that did was when they went to close up, everything behind the person in close up is out of focus. And it's such a throwback to how we used to see things depicted from that time. I mean, it's great now that we have video that can get these crisp images where things are in focus at all kinds of depths, but that's not how cinema worked then. That's not how the documentary footage we have from then works for the most part. And so to have this kind of depth of field that feels like it's from that era is just like, again, it's like music to my ears. It warmed my heart. I can't think of enough metaphors for how much I just love this film visually. And the production design, they didn't overdo people's hair. They didn't, it just feels loose and rough in a way that, again, mirrors, since I wasn't there myself, mirrors what I have seen depicted from those times and those communities. So just a ton of, creative commitment and integrity went into building a world that we get brought into. And it's a devastating world. It's a painful world. It's a tense world. There's danger at every turn. And, I guess if you don't know about Fred Hampton or you didn't read anything about the film, it was a spoiler. Sorry, I said that Fred Hampton is murdered. He is murdered. I knew that going into the film, and it didn't take anything away from me. It's just a really compelling depiction of this moment in the Black struggle for freedom in this country, and also an important reminder that, our government spent millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of mostly man hours, harassing people, murdering people, and, thwarting these movements at every turn. So that history needs to be remembered and told all the time. So just important, beautiful, rich work here. Happy birthday, Shaka King. Thank you for your beautiful work. I look forward to seeing what you do next. Please watch Judas and the Black Messiah. If you've seen it, let me know what you think of it. If you haven't seen it, go watch it, come back, let me know what you think of it. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next Wednesday. Thanks for watching Real Takes. Hit the subscribe button below so the algorithms will tell you when new episodes are out. And if you want to support Real Takes, please visit my Patreon page where you can join at any tier from $2 to $100 per thing I make. The $15 tier is specifically about supporting Real Takes, and you'll get behind the scenes information and be thanked in future videos. See you next Wednesday.